The night my twin sister laughed at my husband, a room full of powerful men went silent. Not because of what she said, but because of who she said it to. She called him just a security guard, said I had married beneath me, said real men in this world would destroy him the moment they found out who I had chosen to spend my life with. And for one terrible second, standing in the middle of my own wedding reception, in my white dress with fairy lights strung above me and a live band playing something romantic in the corner, I almost believed her. Until a man walked through the entrance of that venue. Older, silver-templed, the kind of still that isn't stillness at all, but compressed authority. He looked around the room once, twice, and when his eyes found my husband, this man my family had spent months calling a mistake wrapped in a uniform, he stopped, and he lowered his head. Not politely, not respectfully. The way a man lowers his head when he has just realized he might be standing in the presence of someone he should not have underestimated. The music kept playing, people kept dancing, but in that small radius around us, the world went quiet. Because the man I married wasn't who anyone thought he was. Not my mother, not my sister, not Victor, the man Zara had paraded into our lives like a trophy, the man she'd chosen to make us all bow, and not even me. Not entirely. And by the time they finally said his name out loud, the real name, the one that had traveled through criminal networks across 3 countries, the one that had been whispered in rooms I will never see, it was already too late for every single person who had underestimated him. My name is Amara, and this is the story of the woman I had to become before the world could see who I had already married. There is a specific kind of loneliness that comes from being compared to someone your entire life. Not compared to a standard or a stranger, but compared to someone who shares your face, your blood, the exact same birthday candles year after year on a cake that was always slightly more decorated on her side. Zara and I were born 4 minutes apart. She came first. My mother, Mama Chidima, never let either of us forget it. Growing up in our household in Lagos, everything was measured in status. Our father had been a businessman, comfortable but not wealthy, and when he died when we were 12, Mama took over the currency of the family. Except her currency wasn't money, it was appearances, it was connections. It was the question she asked every single morning before we left for school. What are people going to say? Not, are you happy? Not, did you sleep well? Not, what do you need today? Always, what are people going to say? By the time Zara and I were in university, the rules of our household were unspoken but iron. You married well or you married up. You chose a man based on what his name could do for your family. You did not, under any circumstances, choose with your heart. Your heart was a liability. Your heart would embarrass the family. Zara understood this perfectly. She embraced it. She thrived in it. I suffocated. We looked almost identical. Same deep brown skin, same high cheekbones, same tall frame that made people turn in the market. But Zara had learned early how to weaponize our likeness. She would smile in a way that looked exactly like my smile, but felt nothing like it. She would use my face to open doors, then close those same doors before I could walk through them. By the time we were 24, the competition had officially begun. Mama Chidima sat us both down one Sunday after church, still in her white lace, still holding her Bible, and said, "You are both getting old. This family needs a strong marriage. One of you needs to come home with a man worth talking about." We understood. Zara had already been seeing someone. She'd been strategically secretive about it for months, dropping small hints, a designer bag she said was a gift, a dinner reservation none of us could afford, a phone call she always took outside with the door closed. I had been seeing no one, I had been working, and good at your job, no matter how good, was not the same as worth talking about. When Mama Chidima looked at me across that table, her expression said everything her mouth didn't. Zara is already ahead. Don't fall further behind. I met Daniel 3 months after that Sunday conversation. I was working late. I almost always worked late. And the office building had a new rotating security team that month. New guards were everywhere. Serious, quiet, professional. Daniel was stationed at the lobby desk on the night I missed the last company shuttle. I was irritated, tired, carrying a laptop bag that had stopped being comfortable around noon. I sat down to wait for my taxi, dropped my back too hard, the zipper broke, and half my folders slid across the marble floor. I just sat there for a second, staring at it. And then he was there, quietly, efficiently, without making it a moment. He helped me pick everything up. He handed me the folders in order. He had glanced at the labels and sorted them without being asked. Imports from Southeast Asia are usually dated by shipment window, not arrival, so you might want to resort these before your next presentation. I looked up at him. He was already walking back to his desk. "How do you know how I'm organizing my presentations?" I called after him. He half-turned, a small, composed smile. "I don't, just guessing by the labels." His name tag said Daniel. His uniform was standard, dark blue, brass buttons, the firm's logo on the sleeve. He looked like every other security guard in every other lobby in Lagos. Except for the eyes. The eyes were different. They were the kind of eyes that made you feel like the conversation wasn't over after he'd turned away. That was my first mistake, thinking he was ordinary. But I didn't know that yet. By the third week of late nights, we were talking properly. Not about anything significant at first. He asked me what I was working on. I told him. He actually listened, not the polite nodding people do when they're waiting to speak. He asked precise questions. He remembered details from conversations 2 weeks earlier. One night, I asked him where he was from. He said he'd grown up in the South, moved around a lot. I asked him where he studied. He said, very simply, different places. "That's not an answer," I told him. "It's the truest one I have," he said. He was 29. He drove a modest, used Camry with a dent in the back passenger door. He lived in a flat in a decent but unremarkable neighborhood. He was polite to everyone. He had no social media I could find. No apparent ambition to be anything other than what he appeared to be. My mother would have hated him on sight. I think that was part of why I kept going back to that lobby. One night, as we were leaving the building together, 2 men walked into the lobby. Not employees. Not visitors. They stopped when they saw Daniel, and for a second, just a second, their faces changed. Not recognition, not surprise. Something closer to caution. One of them nodded at him, not casually, carefully, the way you acknowledge someone you don't want to offend. "Good evening," Daniel said, calmly. They didn't respond. They just moved out of his way. I laughed it off, told myself I was imagining things. But later that night, lying awake, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Security guards don't get treated like that. Not by men who look like they run things. That was my second mistake, dismissing what I had seen. In the same month, I was quietly, cautiously beginning to fall for a man with careful eyes and a second-hand Camry. My sister came home with news that shook the house like a thunderclap. She had met someone. Not just someone. She had met, standing in our mother's parlor with her chin lifted and her hands clasped like a queen, the most powerful man in the room. His name was Victor Okafor, and according to Zara, Victor was connected to everything and everyone. He had business interests. He had protection networks. He had associates who commanded respect in ways that normal men did not. She didn't say the word. She didn't have to. Mama Chidima understood immediately. Her eyes went wide, then very, very still. She set down her tea and said in the careful tone of a woman calculating something enormous, "Is he safe?" And Zara smiled the way she always smiled when she had already won. "He's the safest man in this city because everyone else is afraid of him." Victor came to the house the following Sunday. He was tall, well-dressed, with a broad smile and easy charm. He brought wine in French bottles. He kissed my mother's hand when he greeted her, which made her laugh in a way I hadn't heard in years. He spoke with authority on every topic. He had just returned from Abuja. He had meetings in Dubai next month. His watch caught the light every time he moved his wrist. He was, in every surface way, exactly what our mother had prayed for. But I watched him. Something was wrong. Not something I could name at first. He was charming, genuinely charming, but his eyes moved around the room like someone checking not for exits, but for witnesses. His laugh arrived a half-second too late. The expensive watch didn't match the hands wearing it. I mentioned it to Daniel one night. "My sister's boyfriend. He makes me uncomfortable, and I can't figure out why." Daniel looked at me. "What kind of uncomfortable?" "Like, the expensive watch doesn't match the hands," I said. It came out strange, but it was the truest thing I could say. He nodded slowly, didn't dismiss it, said, "Trust that feeling." I didn't trust it enough. Victor came to one of Mama's family dinners after Daniel and I had become official. He sat across the table from Daniel with that smooth, expensive smile he used on everyone, swirling his drink, watching. "So," he said casually, "what exactly do you secure?" The room chuckled. My mother looked at her plate. Daniel didn't move, didn't smile. He leaned back slightly, met Victor's eyes, and said, very quietly, "Things that don't stay secure tend to disappear." The room went still. Victor smiled again, but this time it didn't reach his eyes. Nobody said anything for a moment. Then Mama Chidinma called for more rice, and the evening moved on. But I saw it, the way Victor looked at Daniel after that. Not with dismissal anymore, with assessment. 2 weeks after Zara's engagement party, Daniel asked me to dinner. Not in the lobby, a real dinner, at a restaurant of his choosing. Quiet, good food, low lighting. He was already at the table when I arrived. He stood when he saw me. He told me over dinner that he had feelings for me. He said it plainly, not dramatically. I've been trying to figure out the right time to say this, and I don't think there is a right time, so I'm just going to say it. I told him about my family, about my mother, about what was expected. He listened to everything. Then he said, "I can't promise you a watch that catches the light, but I can promise you that everything I show you is everything I am." I said yes. When I brought Daniel home 3 weeks later, the reception was exactly what I expected. Mama Chidinma looked at his car first, then his shoes, then the firm's logo on his jacket. Her face cycled through several stages before settling on a polite horror she wore for the entire evening. Zara was worse. She pulled me into the kitchen while Daniel talked to my Aunt Blessing and said very quietly, "You are doing this to embarrass me." "I'm doing this because I want to," I told her. "A security guard, Amara. Do you understand what this does to this family while I'm building something real?" "I'm not building your life, Sarah. I'm building mine." She looked at me with those eyes. My eyes in a face that looked like mine but had never once felt like a mirror, and said, "I will not let you drag this family down. This ends." Daniel and I were engaged 6 months later. 4 months before our wedding, something happened that I pretended not to notice. At 2:17 in the morning, Daniel's phone rang. He answered immediately. No hello, just silence. He was listening. For a long time. Then he said one sentence. Who authorized that move? More silence. Then, no, stand down. I'll handle it. He came back to bed. I pretended to be asleep, but my heart was hammering, because that wasn't the voice of a security guard. That was the voice of someone used to being obeyed. I lay still in the dark for a long time. That was my third mistake, not asking the question then. The period between our engagement and our wedding was the most sustained, concentrated cruelty I have ever experienced from my own blood. Zara's wedding was April, mine, June. The timing was, according to her, intentionally designed to steal her thunder. I had just picked a date. But Zara worked that narrative expertly. She told extended family I had rushed the engagement to compete. She told my mother that Daniel was hiding something. Not what, just planting a seed with a frown and a pause and a careful, "I just don't know, Mama. Something about him isn't adding up." She told my Aunt Blessing she'd heard from a friend that the security firm Daniel worked for had connections to bad people. That last one I would think about later, but at the time it was just another weapon. Daniel was extraordinary through it all. When my uncle Emeka made a joke about security guards needing to guard their own future, Daniel smiled and said, "That's exactly what I'm doing." When my mother asked, with the devastating gentleness of a woman who has mastered passive aggression, whether he had any plans to advance himself, he said, "I have several, Ma. I just find it not necessary to announce them." She didn't know what to do with that. He was never rattled, not once, and that rattled other people more than any argument could have. 3 weeks before our wedding, Zara cornered me in the hallway. "You need to be careful," she said. "About what?" She leaned closer, lowered her voice. "I had someone look into your husband." My stomach dropped. "And?" She hesitated. For the first time in my life, Zara hesitated. "They couldn't find anything." "That's good, isn't it?" She shook her head slowly. "No," she said. "That's the problem." I stared at her. "Normal people have records, Amara, trails, a history. Your Daniel has almost nothing before 5 years ago, clean as a whistle in a way that isn't natural. That isn't a man who's been living quietly." She held my eyes. "That's a man who's been hiding." I said nothing. She left, and I stood in that hallway for a long time, because she wasn't wrong. 2 weeks before our wedding, Victor came to see me alone. He arrived at my office in a black car with a driver. I was surprised enough to step outside. He was warm, charming. He put his hand briefly on my arm and said, with genuine seeming concern, "Amara, I want you to be happy, but I need to ask you, as someone who knows a great deal about dangerous situations, do you actually know who this man is? Do you know Daniel's history?" I looked at him. "Do you know mine?" He blinked, just once. Then the smile came back. "Of course, you're a remarkable woman, which is why you deserve a remarkable man." "I have one," I said, and I went back inside. But that night, his words turned slowly in my mind, like a key looking for a lock. "Do you know who this man is?" 3 days before our wedding, someone came to our door. I never saw his face, but I heard the way he spoke to Daniel, low, careful, respectful. "Sir, we didn't know it was you." Silence. Then Daniel's voice, "You still don't." The man left immediately. Daniel locked the door. For the first time since I met him, I saw something in his eyes when he turned back to me. Not fear, not worry. Something older than both. Something that looked like a man preparing for a reckoning he has been postponing for a very long time. The next morning, I found an envelope on our kitchen table. No stamp, no return address, just my name in plain block letters. Inside was a photograph. Daniel, unmistakably Daniel, standing in a large courtyard, not in uniform, Dark clothes, very straight posture. Around him, in a loose circle, 15 men, all of them facing him, all of them looking at him the way soldiers look at a commanding officer. On the back of the photograph, 4 words in the same block letters. Ask him about Rome. I didn't ask him about Rome, but something shifted in me that I didn't fully name. I became quieter, smaller with my thoughts. I pulled inward. He noticed within 2 days. Daniel was not a man who missed small things. He paid close attention to the people he cared about. He told me this early on. I pay close attention to the people I care about. It's a habit I can't turn off. One evening, he sat across from me and said, "Something has changed. Will you tell me?" I put the photograph on the table between us. He looked at it for a long moment without touching it. His expression wasn't guilt, it wasn't fear, it was the tiredness of someone who has been carrying something heavy across a very long distance and can finally see the place they must set it down. "Who sent this?" he asked. "I don't know. It was on the table." "When?" "3 days ago." He absorbed that. "And you've been sitting with it for 3 days." "Yes." He picked up the photograph, looked at it once more, set it down, then he looked at me with those steady eyes and said, "What I'm going to tell you, I need you to receive without reacting for the first few minutes. Can you do that?" I said yes. I have a past that I left deliberately. The life in that photograph is real. Who I am in this house with you is also real. They are not 2 versions of the same person trying to trick you. They are 2 chapters, one of which I have been trying very hard to close. I will tell you everything, but not tonight, because someone else's hands are on this timeline now, and before I tell you, I need to understand whose. Daniel, trust me, 4 more days. 4 days. Our wedding was in 11. Is the name they call you in those circles, is it dangerous? He held my gaze without flinching. The name is something I earned a long time ago. Whether it's dangerous depends entirely on who's using it and why. What is it? A breath. A pause as wide as a door opening in the dark. "We'll get there," he said. "I promise you. We will get there." April. Zara's wedding was every extravagant, overwhelming thing she had planned. 12 bridesmaids, a horse-drawn carriage, 3 outfit changes, a singer flown in from Accra. Mama Chidinmo wept from the moment she arrived. The event trended locally for a weekend. Victor looked perfect, said his vows with conviction, danced with Zara in a way that made the crowd cry, gave a speech about spending his whole life making sure the most beautiful woman in the world never had reason to doubt herself. It was a perfect wedding. And I watched Victor through all of it with the same uncomfortable feeling I could never fully name. At the reception, standing near a group of Victor's guests, I caught fragments of a conversation between 3 men in fine suits near the bar. I wasn't trying to listen. "Doesn't even know the arrangement?" Abuja said 2 months, not now. The oldest of the 3 noticed me nearby. He smiled pleasantly. I smiled back and moved away. At the end of the night, waiting outside for Daniel to bring the car, Victor appeared beside me, jacket off, loosening his tie, something tired in his face that hadn't been there in front of the cameras. "Beautiful wedding," I said. "Isn't it?" he agreed. Then, without looking at me, "Has he told you about Kano?" I turned to him. "What?" But Daniel's car appeared at the end of the drive, and Victor straightened up, composed again, and turned to greet someone else. Kano. In the car, I asked Daniel about it, said it casually, watching his face in the dashboard light. He drove 3 seconds without answering, then, "What made you ask about Kano?" "Victor mentioned it." 2 more seconds. "When did you speak to Victor?" "Outside, just now. He asked if you'd told me about it." Daniel's hands on the wheel were perfectly still. Then, "Victor is a man who asks questions that already have answers. Don't give him the satisfaction of asking him what he meant." But what did he mean? "That he knows things about me, or wants me to think he does." He glanced at me. Whatever Victor tells you about me, bring it to me first. Not your mother, not your sister. Me. Will you do that? Yes, I said. But the name sat in my mind like a stone at the bottom of still water. Kano. I woke on the morning of my wedding feeling like the world was holding its breath. Preparations went as planned. The ceremony was small by our family standards, 150 people, a church in the neighborhood I'd grown up in, flowers I had chosen myself, a dress that was entirely mine. My Aunt Blessing did my hair, my cousin Gozi did my makeup. Daniel had not yet told me everything. The 4 days had passed in charged silence, several phone calls taken outside, several late evenings with his laptop angled away from me. Once, a visitor I didn't see, only heard, a low male voice at the door, a brief conversation, the door closing. But he had been present with me in every way that mattered. Morning coffee made exactly right, his hand over mine every evening, steady breathing beside me every night. I had decided, trust him completely or not at all. There was no middle version that still looked like love. The ceremony was beautiful. And then came the reception. The moment came 3 hours in. Zara had been perfect until then. Polished, gracious, giving a toast that made people cry, posing for photos with me, wearing the smile that looked like mine but wasn't. And then, when the room was loud and nobody was watching closely, she found me at the edge of the dance floor. She looked me in the eyes and said, "You will never be anything." I stood with my champagne glass and let the words land. Your little security guard husband, enjoy him while it lasts, because when the real men in this world find out who you married, he won't last long. I looked at my sister, at this woman who wore my face but had never been my reflection, and I felt, for the first time, not anger, not hurt, clarity. I know you're not saying this to hurt me. I know this is fear. Something is happening with Victor, and it's making you afraid, and I'm the safest place for your fear to land. Her expression flickered, just for a second, just a fraction of something human. Then it closed back up. She turned and walked away. I watched Daniel from across the room. He was talking to my uncle Emeka, the man who'd made the security guard joke months ago, and they were both laughing, easy and genuine, Emeka pointing at Daniel with the familiarity of someone who had decided he liked a person. How had that happened? I almost smiled. And then the man walked in. He came through the entrance of the venue with 2 men flanking him like parentheses, silver-templed, quietly dressed. Nothing extravagant, nothing flashy, but the space responded to him immediately and physically. People moved without being asked. The air in the room rearranged itself. He looked around once, twice, and then his gaze found Daniel. Something happened to this man's face that I had never seen happen to a grown man before. He straightened, involuntarily, immediately, the way a body responds to something older than thought. His chin dipped, a deliberate, precise, unmistakable lowering of the head. Not politely, not respectfully, like a man acknowledging he should not have underestimated. Daniel had not yet seen him, but some peripheral awareness must have registered the change in the room's atmosphere, because he turned slowly from his conversation. He saw the man. He went very still. The man crossed the room. Everyone in his path moved without being pushed. He stopped in front of Daniel. The room was loud. I was too far to hear, but I watched. I watched the man bow his head once more, with intention, and say something. I watched Daniel's face move through something private and complex and land on something resolved. Then Daniel looked up, scanned the room, and found me. 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, he said something with his eyes that was not quite apology and not quite warning. It was, "It's time." I crossed the room. When I reached Daniel's side, he put his arm around me. "Stay here, you're safe, but hold on." The older man looked at me with something respectful and searching. "Is this her?" he asked Daniel. "Yes," Daniel said. Amara, this is Bello. Bello looked at me steadily. I apologize for the interruption on your wedding night, but something has come to our attention that cannot wait. Then it can wait a few hours more, Daniel said, quietly, firmly. Bello shook his head once. The man your sister married is not who she believes him to be. The music was still playing. People were still dancing. We were a small, still center in the middle of it all. Victor, I said. Victor Okafor is a name, one of perhaps 4 this man has used. He has been under observation for 14 months. He is connected to a supply network, things moving through this region. He has been using the social credibility of this marriage as operational cover, and he is now aware that cover has been located. My hand went cold. My sister, I said. Your sister is in no immediate danger, but she needs to be removed from that house, tonight. I turned to Daniel. Who are you? I said, not accusing, not afraid, just finally asking the only question that had ever truly mattered. Daniel looked at me the way he always looked at me, fully, without deflection, without armor. My real name is Daniel Ezuedo. I was born in Kano. I spent 12 years working in organized crime suppression across West and Central Africa. I retired, genuinely retired, 3 years ago. I moved to Lagos and I took the most unremarkable job I could find because I was done, because I wanted a life that was mine. A pause. And then I met you. The photograph, Rome, I said. A summit, years ago. I was there in an official capacity, the most visible I'd ever been. I should never have been photographed. Someone kept that image for a very long time. He glanced at Bello. Victor's network. Victor found out who you were 6 weeks ago, when he heard you were marrying Amara. He understood immediately. He used Zara to access your family. He was collecting information about you through her. My mother's voice. Victor has concerns about Daniel's background. Not protection, intelligence gathering, using Zara as an instrument without her knowledge. He was trying to find your vulnerabilities through me, I said to Daniel. Daniel said nothing, which was its own answer. Before he retired, Bello said, your husband was the commanding authority of the most effective countercrime network in this region, the man that every criminal syndicate from Lagos to N'Djamena spent a decade trying to identify and never could. The music filled the room around us. Someone clinked a glass nearby. The name they used for him, Bello continued, when they finally put a name to him, it was not his real name. It was a title. Silence. What title? I said. Bello looked at me. Then, simply, they called him Don. The music stopped. Just the natural pause between songs, but in that silence, the world rearranged. Bello's men had been moving quietly during our conversation. They were positioned now at specific points in the room, not threatening anyone, not displaying weapons, just standing where they needed to stand. And 2 of Victor's people, men I recognized from the engagement dinner, were near the exit, watching Bello, deciding whether to stay or run. One of them made a phone call. Daniel saw it. How long? He asked Bello. An hour, maybe less. He looked at me. Find Zara and bring her here. Don't explain, just bring her. Daniel, I said, I know we will talk about everything, all of it, but right now, one more time. I looked at my husband, this man I had chosen when no one thought I'd chosen well, and I thought about every moment I had spent in his company, every careful question, every precise word, every time he had been exactly, consistently, entirely himself. One more time, I said, and I went to find my sister. I found Zara near the bar, mid-laugh, champagne in hand. She read something in my face that overrode the reflex to argue with me. She followed without asking. When she saw Bello's folder on the table, when she looked at the first page, I watched the color leave her face in a slow, horrible wave, like water draining from a tub. Confusion first, then shock, then the particular betrayal of a person who realized they were not just deceived, but used, that the lie was engineered with them as its engine. This isn't, she started.
We have been building this file for 14 months, Bello said.
The man you married is a procurement coordinator for a trafficking network operating between 3 countries. His relationships with high-profile women are operational. They provide access, social legitimacy, and, in one previous case, information about law enforcement personnel. Zara's champagne glass had become something she was gripping rather than holding. He wanted access to your family, Bello continued. Once he identified who your sister's husband was, his objective changed. He wanted information about Daniel Izzuto. Who is Daniel Izzuto? Zara said. Barely a sound. The room was very quiet. Daniel said, I am. Zara turned to him, to this man she had dismissed and diminished and called a security guard like it was a slur. This man she had told her sister to leave. This man she had unknowingly delivered Victor to, without knowing that Victor was using her as a living instrument. She looked at him for a long time. Then she looked at me. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, before the competition and the cruelty, before the woman my sister had decided to become, I saw Zara's face do something unguarded. She was terrified. Not of Daniel, not of Bello, of herself, of what she had almost done. Victor was still in the reception when Bello's men moved. He tried the smile. He tried the charm. He said Zara's name once. She was standing 6 feet away. She heard it. She did not move. Her arms were crossed and her face was set, and she did not move. Victor was escorted out. 2 days later, he was arrested. The charges, reported in the dry language of official statements, described a structure with tentacles through 3 countries and a decade of careful construction. Between the lines of what was said and what wasn't, the full picture was dark. Zara was not charged, but she spent time in rooms with men who asked precise questions. When she came home from those rooms, she was a different shape than when she'd entered. 3 weeks passed before she came to our door. She arrived in regular clothes, no makeup, looking for the first time in years like herself, the version of herself that existed before she decided that winning mattered more than being.
I need to say something, she said, and I need to say it without you replying until I'm done. I stepped aside and let her in. She talked for 45 minutes. I will keep what she said between us, but she said the word sorry 11 times, and each one came from a different room in her chest. By the end, we were both crying, and Daniel brought tea from the kitchen without being asked, set it on the table, and went quietly back to his reading. Zara watched him go. "Who is he really?" she whispered. "He's my husband," I said. "That's the most important answer. Everything else is his to tell you if he wants to." She nodded. She picked up the tea. My mother's transformation was slower, more complicated, because she had to reckon with something harder than betrayal. She had to reckon with the full accounting of what her values had made possible. It was her obsession with status that had made Zara susceptible to Victor. It was the question she asked every morning, "What are people going to say?" that had trained her daughters to value the performance of success over its substance. Victor had understood that. He had known exactly which family to choose, exactly which questions to answer with the right words. Mama Chidima came to our home 3 weeks after the wedding. She sat across from Daniel at our kitchen table, and she said, with the considerable effort of a proud woman practicing humility, "I was wrong about you." Daniel said, "You were being a mother. I understand it." "I was being a fool." "You're not a fool, Ma. You were given false information by someone very skilled at providing it. That's not the same thing." She looked at him for a long time. Then, "Amara told me they call you Dawn." "They did," he said, past tense. "And what do I call you?" "Daniel," he said. "Just Daniel. That's all I want." My mother nodded. She reached across the table and patted his hand, the same hand she had refused to look at for months, and then she straightened her back and said, "I'll need more tea if we're going to talk about this properly." 3 months after the wedding, Daniel sat me down for the conversation he had prefaced with, "I told you we'd get there." He told me everything. The years in Kano, the recruitment, age 19, by a counter-crime unit that had been watching him for a year before they approached, the network he built from nothing, 12 years of operations spanning 7 countries, 12 languages among his people, a structure so deliberately obscured that the criminal syndicates pursuing it had never found its center.
The retirement. 2 years to negotiate safely, to gradually transfer authority without leaving anyone exposed. The new life in Lagos. The lobby. He told me about Rome. The photograph. The man who had held it for 15 years. Not out of malice initially, but out of wariness. The way dangerous people preserve their options. And then he told me about Kano specifically. Early in his career, there had been a girl, 17, sister of a man in a network he was dismantling. She had been caught in something she didn't choose. He had used every resource he had, put himself at risk doing it, to extract her, relocated her, gave her a new start.
She had a daughter now, 12 years old, living safely in the north. The man at the top of Victor's supply chain, the man arrested 2 weeks after Victor in the second phase of the operation, was the same man whose sister Daniel had extracted from Kano 15 years ago. He had spent 15 years trying to identify who had saved her, whether it was mercy or strategy. When he was finally processed, after the arrest, in a holding room with 2 officers and Bello, he had asked one question before anything else. Is the girl still safe? Bello had called Daniel. Daniel had said, "Yes, she is." The man had nodded and said nothing more.
What I know now, I know that love doesn't come because you deserve it. It doesn't arrive as a reward for suffering enough or choosing correctly at the right moment. It comes sideways at 11 p.m. in a lobby when a folder breaks open on a marble floor and a man with careful eyes sorts your papers in the right order without being asked. I know that power doesn't always look like what it's supposed to. Sometimes it wears a rented tuxedo with slightly wrong-fitting shoulders and drives a Camry with a dent in the rear door and says, "Trust me," in a voice that sounds like an ordinary request, but is actually a man offering you everything he has left to give. I know that my sister is not a villain. She is a woman raised to believe her value was performance, and she performed, brilliantly and terribly, and at great cost to herself. We are rebuilding something now, out of the wreckage of those years. Something smaller than what we had, but more honest, more load-bearing, the kind of structure that holds in a storm. I know that my mother loves me. I always knew it. I just needed her to show it in a way that didn't require me to disappear. And I know this in the marrow of my bones, that when the room fell silent at my wedding, and a man lowered his head in front of my husband, and Bello said that name out loud in the quiet of that side room, my husband looked at me first, not at the man who said it, not at the room, at me, the way he always looks at me, completely, without armor. And then he said to Bello, quietly, "That's not my name anymore." Like a door closing on a long, long chapter. And then he turned back to me, in the middle of our wedding reception, with the music starting again and the lights gold above us, and he asked me to dance. I said yes. I have been saying yes ever since. There is one more thing you should know. The security firm that placed Daniel in that lobby, the firm whose logo was on his jacket the night I met him, the one my mother had looked at with such careful disdain. I looked it up 6 months after the wedding. It was registered in Lagos. Its principal director, one Daniel E. Its founding date, 3 weeks before I started working late. I put my phone on the table at dinner with the registration page open and facing him. He looked at it. Then at me. Those eyes. You didn't know me, I said. I knew of you, he said. A logistics coordinator with a gift for seeing things others missed. I had been looking for someone like that for a very long time. I stared at him. So you built a fake security firm. I built a very real security firm. With one very specific posting. For me. For you. I sat with that for a long time. And then I started laughing. Not out of hurt, not out of betrayal, because by then I knew this man in the truest sense, and what he had done was not manipulation. It was the most meticulous, quietly extraordinary, completely absurd declaration of intent I had ever heard of in my life. He had seen something, in a file, a photograph, a conversation I'll never fully know, and instead of introducing himself like a normal person, he had constructed an operational cover around a lobby so that I might drop a folder and he might be standing there to help me pick it up. You are insane, I told him. Possibly. And you call yourself retired. I am retired. Everything after meeting you has been entirely personal. The candle between us was low. The city made its endless noise beyond the window. I picked up my fork. Dawn, I said. Very quietly. Testing it. He looked up from his plate. Don't, he said. Equally quiet. But the corner of his mouth was doing the thing it does when he is trying very hard not to smile. I smiled instead. For both of us. And the story, our story, kept going. Because the best ones always do.
Please like and subscribe for more interesting stories.